Why do you keep speculating in a space like this? Within scams and ruggers and things. Damn me, you be getting liquidated by pretend inefficiency and the useless tokens like this. Why did you quit so that and they give you your back? So shout that there's some money. Shout till it's just a lie. It's just a real call. I can do say how I need. Deep in your eyes, embrace the light. Come, let's hang around under the light. I'll have it for you. Embrace the light. Finish someone. Salute the light.
Embrace the light, motherfucker. Welcome back to another episode of the Light Hour live stream. The Light Hour live stream is a Litecoin dedicated live stream that we host on the Flipping Finance page every Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, 5 p.m. EST, where we keep the Litecoin conversation going one way or another. So if you're a supporter of Litecoin, or you're someone who's just mildly interested in Litecoin, or you're someone who actually dislikes Litecoin and is looking for the reasons to continue to dislike Litecoin, then the Light Hour live stream is definitely your place to be. Now, today, we're going to be talking about an important topic because I came across a video, and this is one that we're going to spend the entirety of this live stream going through. And it's a video essentially where a Bitcoin maximalist or a couple Bitcoin maximalists actually did a presentation on why essentially Bitcoin is superior to literally everything else, which, I mean, if you know anything about maximalism, that's essentially the entire argument. But their thesis or their entire presentation rests on the premise that money converges to one, and a blockchain needs a native currency for security, and therefore, the consequence is that there is only one currency and one blockchain that is viable or valuable. Now, besides the fact that this is come on, it's a very it's a very strange claim to make, right? I mean, it's the arguments that they actually employ to trying to derive their conclusions actually include lots of half truths. Now, if one of the worst forms of lies in this life, and essentially one of the best forms of lies to tell, are half truths, right? There's a truth inside, but then you just embellish it with some lies, and no one really knows the difference, right? And once you put it in corporate speak or intellectual speak and use of that, wording around it, make it sound fancy. Essentially, people just eat it up and people barely question it. And that's how you have self fulfilling prophecies emerge, right? Just this embellished stories that permeate the consciousness of people. And so that's what we're going to spend this live stream talking about from start to finish. Or wherever we end, that is where the live stream will end. And yeah, it's a pretty interesting one. So it's definitely going to be a very interesting stream we're going to be having today. So buckle up, guys, because we're going to have a very, very nice ride. But before I start, of course, I have to give my friends at 84 million a shout out because they're really cool. And I was able to get this merch, Litecoin merch, because of them. And so if you want to get cool Litecoin merchandise like the one I'm putting on, you should go to 84million.com/shop and go get your hands on a Litecoin merch so that you can look cool. So if you like Litecoin, of course, you should get a Litecoin merch. If you dislike Litecoin, of course, you should get a Litecoin merch. So when Litecoin goes to zero, you can find a clown us. Haha, look at you, crazy Litecoiners, whatever. And with that being said, we're going to be kicking that out the road, and we're going to be diving into the main topic of today, which is essentially why must Bitcoin maxes lie? Like, why must they lie? Now, to be very clear, all right, not all Bitcoin maximalists fall into the archetype of maximalists that are essentially the typical maximalist picture we have in our minds when we talk about maximalists, right? The greedy, liars that essentially just put a whole bunch of word salads that include some truths, a lot of lies, and a bunch of like professional speak. And they use that to reinforce these their beliefs and perpetuate the idea that nothing else besides Bitcoin should exist. Which is purely, in my opinion, at least from my perspective, financially driven. Just the incentive of getting more people to buy only Bitcoin, pump only Bitcoin, buy their bags, absolutely nothing else. And not all Bitcoin maximalists fall in that category. I must make this clear, right? We have other Bitcoin maximalists like Roger Ver, like Charlie Lee, like, lots of them that actually do believe that money should actually function as money, and ultimately have the perspective that, well, you're going to have all of these chains that are essentially censorship resistant and peer-to-peer digital cash, and they're all going to compete. But anything that is not in that line of thought or not technically structured like that is just not worth believing in. Now, this is a technical argument with a very consistent logic. They don't need to add lies or embellishments like the other versions of Bitcoin maximalists that essentially need to pretend like the entire corpus of their thesis or their stand is one that is just financially driven and nothing else. And so we're going to be diving into this first type in today's video. Now, we're going to be opening it up and we're just going to be going straight in. All right, so let's begin. Okay, we had a bit of a break in transmission there. I don't know what caused it, but yeah, we're back. And apologies for the inconveniences around that. We're going to be going straight into the video right away. And so, yeah, let's begin. Let's begin. Let's watch the video. Let's hear the thesis of this Bitcoin maxis. And I'm just going to put one more disclaimer, right? These guys do have some interesting things to say, some truth. Like I said, it's not just all lies. There are a lot of truths and useful informations and things that I actually genuinely learned from this video. So we're just going to be watching and absorbing what is necessary, and I will only be addressing the parts that I believe are lies or general misrepresentations of the facts. And so, yeah, we're just going to go ahead and begin.
All right, so there's this guy, Ricky Bobby, and he's got this really important quote that's, if you're not first, you're last. And I think that's true in NASCAR. In this context, it's that Bitcoin wasn't first, but it is last. And it's last because it works, and that it works enforcing its fixed supply. And that as I get in to describe what a blockchain is, and this is going to be a little bit more dense than the last subject, but I'm going to really focus on the logic. I need you to hold a few ideas in your head at the highest level. This idea that what Drew just communicated, that the fixed supply was the essential, the thing to make it work, the essential simplifying technical solution to make digital money work, the fixed supply. That a fixed supply is also the best form of money. That if you could be paid in a form of money that can't be printed, that is better than any other form of money, better than a form of money that could increase in supply by 1%, 2%, 3%, even arbitrarily get destroyed. A money that simply can't get printed at all is the best, and that money converges to one. Money converging to one is what helps allow all the noise to fall to the background. It's that it is not an opinion, and it's something that you are going to have to test with your own logic, because it is an economic truth. It's not a coincidence, and people aren't hallucinating into, the thousands years of history of money, and they're not collectively hallucinating into Bitcoin. And that brings me to the importance of Bitcoin and its blockchain. This is going to be.
So I'm going to have to pause there, right? Because this is where I have my first objection. So now the idea that money converges to one, and the idea of it being an economic truth that can actually be tested upon thousands of years of economic history, is one that is very common, amongst Bitcoin maximalists. Now, to just break it down to you, right? No complex talk. If you look at societies throughout history, right? Most of them have essentially monetized themselves, or at least many Maxis will tell you that most of them have actually monetized themselves in gold. And I've heard that far more often than not, right? And they say, because gold is scarcer than the alternative silver, and what just happens is all of society just ends up using gold, and they don't end up using these other metals, and that's kind of how it's worked for thousands of years. And ultimately, there's never been any need for any other one. And just as the entirety of money tree, all of the money tree use converge to gold, the same logic they apply to how all of the money tree use converge to US dollars. Now, it's no surprise. Everybody knows the US dollars, is the world reserve currency. So the world uses the United States dollar, and every country essentially that I know kind of uses US dollars as, the backing for their currency, and it's pegged to the US dollar. So that's that point, right? But one thing, the first objection to this idea that all of money converges to one is, number one, the fact that not only gold was actually monetized. Gold is not the only metal that actually was monetized throughout history, right? So it's been both gold and silver. So as a matter of fact, more societies and more civilizations monetize silver than those that monetize gold. Ancient Rome, there are lots of them, and you can do your research as a percentage, as a numerical percentage, right? Now, it could be argued that the more prosperous societies, for example, even early America monetized gold, and at that time it was kind of like an economic advantage for monetary America, early America and Great Britain over like India and China that monetized in silver because gold was scarcer and essentially just allowed them to be more economically strong than the others. But the point remains that more civilizations actually monetize themselves in silver as opposed to gold. And another thing is, back then, there's this big problem with monetizing in either gold or silver that it just makes it convenient for money to converge around one because the cost to the cost of switching, like how do you switch from gold to silver? You have to take your gold and go look for someone who's gonna be willing to give you silver for it. And so that barrier was there. It wasn't just easy for you to just take your gold and then switch to silver. You had to go through the process of taking it to a dealer and getting silver, and you most likely are going to get you're going to get that silver at a markup, right? You're going to pay more gold for that silver. It's just messy, right? So that barrier kind of forces you to essentially use gold because you don't really have an option, right? And it's the same with silver. If you are using silver, there was a cost, right? There was a barrier that kind of like prevented you from switching to gold, which I just said. And there's also the barrier of the fact that like these things are actually heavy. I mean, if you have a lot of silver, imagine you're a wealthy person, you had lots of silver, you had lots of gold. They were actually bulky to carry around, so you couldn't, right? It just wasn't convenient. Now, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies do not face the same bottleneck. There are no constraints when it comes to moving between one and the other. There are no constraint. You can easily swap from one to another in seconds. It will cost absolutely nothing. So the convenience, the inconvenience that existed that could enforce, monetization, converging around whatever particular metal you were using back in the day, does not exist when it comes to cryptocurrencies. It just doesn't, because that barrier is not there. You can easily swap between whatever cryptos and whatever other cryptos in seconds. And then you have that cryptocurrency, right? So yeah, Bitcoin does not have that particular leverage. Now, if you talk about United States, right, talk about the US dollar. The fact that the US dollar has been the dominant currency of the world over the past, how many decades, right? Since the Bretton Woods Agreement, right? Essentially, the US has been able to enforce the dominance of the dollar in a geopolitical way, right? They've been able to enforce the dollar on the world. This is not something, militaristically, by the way, with threats of sanction. I mean, if you tried not to use the US dollar, I mean, this is a US-led global economy. If you tried to not denominate yourself in US dollar, you try to peg your currency to something else, you're just going to get hit with sanctions, right? You're going to get hit with sanctions, or they might say you have nukes and you're going to get invaded and your country is going to fall. So what are you going to do? You're going to have to use the US dollar. That is one luxury that the United States dollar has that, it's kind of been able to use in its favor to kind of like converge all of the monetary use to it. But Bitcoin does not have that. There's no military to enforce its use. There is no economic sanctions that exist with not using it. So the same reasons that applies to these historic monetary instruments that have been able to like converge dominance to themselves do not apply to Bitcoin. So why do they keep referencing this historical economic fact and trying to apply to Bitcoin when it clearly doesn't? It just doesn't, right? But that's for that. And I see your comment, MK. I agree with the point that the ideal currency converges to one, but there can be multiple ones. I'm gonna say that in response to that, right? Unless there is a more psychological reason why it converges to one, and let's say that one ends up being Bitcoin, I don't see any other reason why it should be the same in terms of crypto, because for reasons I've already previously said, there are no restrictions. There are no practical restrictions. There are no military enforced restrictions in cryptocurrencies. So the traditional reasons why such convergence should happen do not exist in crypto. And so that point is just not an economic fact that, in my opinion, can be enforced on Bitcoin. And I think these people know, because I'm going to assume that these people are very intelligent people that are able to see all possible sides to their arguments and know where the weaknesses of their arguments lie. And I know that they have actually been pointing this thing out in the past, because I've seen a couple of debates where this thing ended up being pointed out to them. But yeah, it still gets repeated, because I guess that's how you perpetrate an idea.
The logic that explains to you why only one blockchain is valuable or viable. And if I explain to you that there are three camps: Bitcoiners, crypto/blockchain enthusiasts, and Gen Pop, when they start to understand this, Gen Pop is relieved. They're happy. Like, the noise gets to subside. The people that are genuinely interested in crypto and blockchain, they're genuinely disappointed when they come to understand this. And I'm telling you that for real. People will say, if it's just Bitcoin, that's sad, because they think that blockchain is going to solve the world. The blockchain is going to solve car title and real estate title and any problem you can imagine. People even try to put beef on the blockchain. Didn't work. People got sued, like seriously sued. But it's no laughing matter. So it's all okay too, because everything's going to be built on Bitcoin, and everything that people envision Bitcoin or crypto to solve is just going to be solved on Bitcoin, because money is every side of every other value transfer. And we'll talk about that in the last part. But anchored to those ideas, the fixed supply is the most important thing. Money converges to one. And this last one, which is, it doesn't matter what all crypto or blockchain says it wants to be. If there's a token and it's only valuable in exchange and it doesn't have a claim on a productive asset like a stock or a bond, it has to compete with money. They're all competing as money. Money does converge to one, and Bitcoin does have a fixed supply. So where does blockchain come in? Bitcoin and its blockchain are interdependent. I'm going to jump to this conclusion, and this is a blockchain decision tree from the Bitcoin standard, which I recommend you read. And it says, do you need digital cash? No, you don't need a blockchain. Yes, use Bitcoin. It's the only blockchain that matters. That's the conclusion of this, and we'll talk about why. The key insight here is that Bitcoin wouldn't work without its blockchain, and its blockchain would not be valuable without Bitcoin, the currency. One does not exist without the other. So what is a blockchain? A blockchain is simply an invention native to Bitcoin that enables the removal of third parties in currency transactions. It serves no other purpose. Now, to conceptualize it, people oftentimes think about the blockchain as this amorphous.
Sorry, that's actually a very inventive definition of a blockchain, because I mean, a blockchain is just a way to order data sets in a block, and you sort of like verify that through multiple ways in a way that you make it impossible, or at least extremely difficult, to alter any of these data sets in any of the blocks. This this is a very interesting definition of a blockchain. It's the first of this definition of the blockchain I've ever seen, and kind of like a very interesting definition that appears to me as an attempt to sort of like define blockchain as Bitcoin, but whatever. It's not really a problem. I'm just gonna continue watching it.
This thing in the cloud that everyone's committing transactions to. That's not the case. There is no one blockchain. Everyone within the Bitcoin network is maintaining their own version of a blockchain. And what that blockchain represents is the ordering of Bitcoin transactions. Why is the ordering of Bitcoin transactions important? Because if we have this fixed money supply and it's going to power the future, we need to be able to send it to each other. And if I'm going to send you a Bitcoin, the network has to know whether I'm the actual valid holder of it and if I can actually transfer it to you and validate it as being true. And there is this inherent relationship and importance of money and the immutability of records. So if the blockchain is this function to order currency transactions, and it's important to order currency transactions because we're actually using money to affect trade. Money is just a tool, and we use the tool to affect trade to build things like cars and real estate and schools, that it's very important to know what transactions happen first, such that people can spend it and only spend it once. This is referred to as the double spending problem. But money is also no good if the records are not immutable. And what do I mean by that? It's that if a blockchain has a set of records that are easily subject to change, the money can't work. The fixed supply is no good. And that immutability is actually an emergent property of Bitcoin, not a property inherent to blockchain. Again, I told you that the word
Sorry, I need to
decentralization is
hear that
trivialized.
part again. I didn't catch
The
it.
idea that you can just put something on the blockchain and that the system just works is
Oh, how do I
similarly
take this
naive.
back?
And that if Bitcoin's records
Oh
were not
my
immutable, it
God.
would not be. And that immutability is actually an emergent property of Bitcoin, not a property inherent to blockchain.
Okay.
Again, I told you that the word decentralization is trivialized. The idea that you can just put something on the blockchain and that the system just works is similarly naive. And that if Bitcoin's records were not immutable, it would not be valuable or viable as a currency. So let me give you an example. Imagine you gave me your car and I gave you Bitcoin. If Bitcoin's records were immutable, or were mutable, if they were changeable, if they were subject to arbitrary change, I could end up with your car and my money, and you would end up without your car and without any money. The system doesn't work in that environment. Now, let me go to the other side of the example. Let's talk about cars, because people want to put car titles and real estate titles on the blockchain. Bitcoin tracks and enforces ownership. It at all times tracks and enforces who has the currency and helps validate currency transactions. At this moment, people are sending Bitcoin from every nook and cranny of the world, and all the money's getting to the right place, and no one can steal other people's money. And it's doing all that without a central coordinator. It is doing two things: tracking ownership and importantly, enforcing ownership. If a blockchain cannot do both, it's not valuable. So let's think about it in the context of car title. We could possibly reimagine putting all or car title onto a blockchain. You can't enforce the transfer of the car. You can't. That's a physical process. It's inherently detached from a digital reality. Separately, let's say that you did get those records on a blockchain. Same, the problem still exists. Imagine title transfers from me to you for the car, but these records are not secure and the title goes back to you. It comes back to the same problem, that you need something to secure the records. So we need to think about it in the context of Bitcoin. Well, what secures the records? Well, in the context of Bitcoin,
Sorry, I just want to make a little comment on that. That's a very bang on example of, it's like one of the best arguments he made in this video, and I really like it because like it really puts, kind of like the idea, oh, we're gonna do a million things with the blockchain. It's one of the most ridiculous things in my opinion, and there's an objective reason why that is. Like he just said, if you're gonna transfer ownership of a car certificate on the blockchain, well, I can still drive off with the car. How are you going to enforce that? How are you going to transfer the car itself? It's kind of like pretty pointless. If you can transfer ownership of a house certificate to your house, what if they use a gun and get you out of the house or something? I don't know. Anything. Imagine if you transfer house certificates to your own blockchain the same way you would transfer, let's say, an NFT or something, and someone comes, the person who bought the house comes, murders you, gets you out of the house, no one knows, and he gets your wallet, and now he owns it. Who's going to do it? How do you enforce the ownership of the house itself? It's kind of like very pointless, and that's a very good argument. I'm going to say that's one of the better arguments of like Bitcoin maximalism. But the problem, again, I don't have a problem with the technical ideas. It's the conclusions that are coming out of this, and the ways that they're trying to skew the conclusions into getting a BTC only answer, right? They're trying to get, they're asking all this, important questions, taking into account all this important technical and logical considerations, and they're somehow looking for ways to bring out a BTC only answer to these questions. And it's what is where my problem lies. And yeah, that's what we're gonna be looking at more in the video. But yeah, that's a very, very wonderful argument right there.
Drew was mentioning is power, real world power. Currently, the Bitcoin network is secured by 20 to 30 gigawatts of power 24/7. This is an example of a Bitcoin mine about an hour from here out in Rockdale, Texas, that's run by Riot, that has about 700 megawatts of power running 24/7, securing the Bitcoin network. What pays for that power? One thing, Bitcoin. What needs to be secured? The records of ownership of Bitcoin. The records would not be secure if there weren't a currency to pay for it. And importantly, in this context, when people provide this proof of work, when they run this power to secure the fixed supply and ensure that when a currency transaction is sent, that it's actually valid and it can only be spent once, that those people running the power get paid trustlessly. That it's not dependent on a central third party, whether or not if they do the work, they get paid. That is not true in a centralized system. Can't be true. It's always dependent on trust. One thing has to be delivered first. And this is where we come to a more simplifying idea, is that Bitcoin is the only secure blockchain. Money converges to one. This is a chart on the right of Bitcoin.
So now you hear the claim. Bitcoin is the only secure blockchain. Now, not proof of work is the only secure path towards blockchain security. Bitcoin is the only secure blockchain. That is the claim he's making. Now, let's hear how he justifies this, because again, to justify this, he has to prove somehow that, well, Litecoin is not secure enough like Bitcoin, right? And the other proof of work competitors to Bitcoin, like Monero and Zcash, and sort of like prove in some way that these are not secure, and Bitcoin is in fact the only secure blockchain. So let's figure out if he does that.
Hash rate. 5 years ago, it was at 100 exahashes. You don't have to know what 100 exahashes is. Today, it's at 800, 8 times more. In 2017, there was only 5 exahashes securing the Bitcoin network. So today, it is 160 times more secure. China banned Bitcoin mining in 2021. That's that small little blip right there. Bitcoin hash rate temporarily cut in half, and now we're 8 times higher. The Bitcoin network didn't stop working.
Okay. I don't know what that is, why that's kind of like slowed down. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What's the problem with that? That just paused unnecessarily. Let's go. Yay, Master. Shout out to you, bro. Now, I just want to quickly point something out that he just said, right? Again, he's talking about like hash rate as, as if it's this one-off, slam dunk measure of network security, which I'm going to believe that he understands that like hash rates is not like a one-off benchmark for security, right? Mining equipments get more efficient so they can produce more hashes with less power. So the hash rate the hash rate chart can in fact continue to go up without the number of miners actually increasing, which conversely would mean there's no extra energy being expended to get all of those extra hash rate, which would also mean that Bitcoin isn't actually getting meaningfully secure, even though the hash rate's actually increasing. So it's not really a cut and dry, benchmark for network security. Why does he need to say that? Why does he need to act like it? I don't know. Again, that's why I'm very confused why they do this, but whatever.
Bitcoin hash rate temporarily cut in half, and now we're 8 times higher. The Bitcoin network didn't stop working. But more importantly, the Bitcoin hash rate is 800 exahashes. The next most secure system has 4 exahashes. In reality, the next most secure is not secure at all. Did you
catch that? Did you catch that? Did you actually catch what he just did there? Now let's go back. Let's go back again and listen to what he just said. For those that didn't catch it.
But more importantly, the Bitcoin hash rate is 800 exahashes. The next most secure system has 4 exahashes. In reality, the next most secure is not secure at all.
Did you catch that? Now, again, why do they need to do this? Why do they actually need to lie? Notice how he did not mention what that next secure coin is, and he just said the next secure coin. Like, it is so deceptive and so malicious. It's ridiculous. It's actually an insult on his intellectual integrity for him not to be able to even mention what this coin is so people can fact check it, right? And again, it's just going off of this idea that like the hash rate is it's a one shot measure for network security, when again, hash rates, it's not all proof of work coins that use the same hash and algorithm. So you can't say, oh, just because this SHA-256 coins hash rate is much higher than this Scrypt coins hash rate, or this ehash coins hash rate, or whatever other hash and algorithms hash rate is. You can't say just because of that it's more secure than the others. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't actually check for a lots of obvious reasons, right? I mean, one of the things that makes comparative hash rates a topic of discussion is the fact that, like, if one hash rate is like big and they're both in the same hash and algorithm, the problem is usually that one from that hash and algorithm can end up like attacking the others, because like the miners would point all of their hash rate to the lower chain, the much smaller chain, and then they're going to take over it, and they're probably going to like cause some problems or whatnot. But this doesn't exist across hash rate. So like, just because Bitcoin's SHA-256 miners have lots and lots of hash rate that Litecoin Litecoin's Scrypt miners don't have, does not mean they can point that SHA-256 hash rate towards Scrypt and attack it. So if they can't do that, what risk? I mean, how is it relatively weaker? How is it relatively less secure? And again, remember, the hash rate that Litecoin has versus the hash rate Bitcoin has, they are protecting completely different values. Like, I mean, Litecoin is a much smaller hash rate, protecting like a $4 billion market cap, and Bitcoin is a lot of hash rate protecting $1.5 trillion market cap. Of course, it's going to be a much bigger number. Like, there are lots of reasons why this is just a deceptive argument, but he still makes the argument because what is his motivation? What is his motivation? So let's continue to watch it. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and play.
Could you imagine storing your money in a network that is 200 times less secure when you had the option to secure your money in a network that is 200 times more secure?
And by the way, if he's actually talking about like Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash, which most likely this would be, Bitcoin Cash is not like 200 times less secure than Bitcoin, because Bitcoin Cash actually has dynamic difficulty adjustment. So like, the Bitcoin miners can't just attack Bitcoin and they're just gonna take over the network so easily or whatnot. but again, he doesn't, and that's why, and in my opinion, that's my explanation for why he probably doesn't list Bitcoin Cash as that second most secure coin. He just says the next most secure coin. He just vaguely names it. Oh, I see it coming from Master. It's such a clown. Of course, it's such a clown. Oh, we've got Earn Not Gifted in the building. What's up, my brother? What's up? Welcome, guys. I'm so happy you guys are here, because of course I'm going through this video that I have nothing else to call it besides Maxi propaganda video, that essentially tries to make an argument that Bitcoin is the only coin that should exist, just putting it in a less propagandized way and just going straight to what you're trying to establish. And that's what we've been doing so far. And I wish I could like go through what we just talked about, because it was very interesting, but there are more interesting things to cover. So maybe you're gonna just have to watch the replay bit to kind of like get this parts that we've already talked about. But yeah, pretty outrageous stuff he said already. And by the way, shout out to you, Earned. a lot of the things I'm saying, I actually learned from you. I must give you that credit. Credit where credit is due. You know, real shout out to you. If you guys are here and you're in Litecoin community, you're not following Earned, I don't know what you're doing. The dude is a resource of information, is a very wonderful gift to this community, and everybody should be following him. So we're gonna go back to the video. And we're just gonna play.
It's not a question of 51% and 49. It's 200 to 1, but it's also not a coincidence why all value accrues to Bitcoin. It's because money converges to one, and there's only one valuable blockchain. And this is the end logic as to why you don't need any other crypto, you don't need any other blockchain, you just need Bitcoin. The money converging to one blockchain reality. It is that money converges to one, and a blockchain needs a native currency for security. So if you accept this premise that money converges to one, and that a blockchain is only good in the context of money because it needs something to pay for security, and the records will not be safe if they're not immutable, and they won't be able to be relied upon. Consequences that there is only one currency, only one blockchain that is viable or valuable, and that the world is converging on Bitcoin because it has a credibly enforced fixed supply. Not just we say that it's 21 million and therefore everyone must accept it by fiat. That it's credibly enforced, and it's only credibly enforced because of the decentralized nature of it, and because it has this record system that is actually immutable that people can rely on. But if I talk about the immutability being important, decentralization being important, how Bitcoin is 200 times more secure, and functionally it's the only one that's more secure.
Oh my god. Okay, I'm seeing you guys' comments. Okay, because BC with such low monetary demand, it's gone from 99% with 60%. Oh yeah, because with yeah, actually, like the dominance continues to go down as Earn's books coming. Okay, yeah, Earn's book is coming out soon, by the way, for you guys in the audience. The back to this video, right? The leaps of logic he's gone. Like, bro, I don't know the conclusion he's been able to derive from essentially, giving an argument for why there shouldn't be any other usefulness for blockchain besides money, of course, which is a very good argument. And it sort of like goes to that, to talking about how Bitcoin is the only secure form of money, and his arguments around the arguments reinforcing that point was essentially a straw man of the idea of hash rate. And he's been able to go from that to that, and somehow put scarcity inside and act like it's some sort of like unique characteristic of Bitcoin, and kind of like gone from that into making this conclusion that so convergence to Bitcoin. It's something that would sound very fanciful to someone who doesn't understand, which is essentially 95% of people in crypto and out of crypto. I mean, people just don't understand how these things work. So of course they're gonna listen to it. That's why, and I'm gonna say this right before we continue with the video. It's important for every single one of us Litecoiners to do our best in dispelling the nonsense these guys are spewing as much as possible. We can't just sit down and say, oh, the truth's gonna come out. It's not gonna come out. The truth about diamonds did not come out on time to make any reasonable difference. People still think these things are scarce, even though they're obviously not, right? A lie, when perpetuated long enough, will end up becoming true, and you're going to have a self-fulfilling prophecy in your hands if we do not do our best to combat things like this. So that's why I appreciate people like Are Not Gifted, like Master, like Toad, and every single person, Aldo, the rest of us in this community, Christopher, LTC, that are doing our best to actually try to push back against this thing. Because it's extremely important that we actually like contribute our own efforts into dispelling these things actively. And this should be, in my opinion, again, our main direction of focus whenever we get an explosive run in Litecoin. We should be trying to rewrite these ideas. Yeah, I believe I'm getting too personal. Let's get back to the video, guys. Sorry.
It wasn't always that case. It had to get to that point. And Drew is going to talk about how Bitcoin got from inception to this highly robust, highly decentralized system that does have this important emergent property of immutability.
Thank you, Parker. Okay. So as Parker was saying, so Bitcoin has this tremendous hash rate, right? Thousands of developers, millions of people using this, provides it great support in being decentralized. But how did it get here? It wasn't obvious, by the way, that it would ever get here. I think people who have been in Bitcoin for a decade or more may feel some pride in that, despite not having any certainty that we would arrive at this point, that we somehow did anyway. I've created this little diagram here because I want to try to highlight the relationship between two different ideas. Number one is the notion of centralization versus decentralization here on the left and right axis. And then the other is the notion of scale, right? So low scale, small systems with a small number of users, a small amount of volume, or a small market capitalization at the bottom, and then globally important high scale systems that everyone uses that are ascendant at the top, right? So my claim is that there's kind of a red arrow, a pattern on this diagram that we as engineers, as technologists, really like and really understand. And that is, how do we make something run at an incredibly high scale by making it very, very strongly controlled in a centralized way, by making sure that all its parts are functioning, they're well tested, there's no adversarial or unexpected behavior. That's how we deliver services like Google. That's how we deliver ChatGPT. That's how Amazon's logistic business is able to actually operate at the scale that it does. It's very, very well controlled. But none of those projects were inspirations for Satoshi, right? Satoshi mentions different projects.
Okay. Now this is a very strange occurrence that just happened right now. I think we just got, I don't know if it was DDoS or whatever, but for some reason the stream crashed. Now, the first time I've ever experienced this since I've started using Starlink, which has, I mean, it doesn't get network interruptions like this, was the first time I made a Maxi post, essentially my first stream, or at least my second stream, which was the last, like 2, 3 streams ago, when I talked about Bitcoin maximalism, uh, titled "Reject Maxi Classism." Now that stream got interrupted. This stream has gotten interrupted again. Now, I don't want to be I don't want to be a schizo and say, oh, this or that or whatever, but it's pretty strange. It's pretty strange why this happened and why this got interrupted. But we're just gonna go ahead and we're gonna continue what we're talking about, because yeah, we're about to conclude anyways. So just go ahead and finish it up, baby. Whoever's trying to bring this stream down, why? If you're a Bitcoin maxi, why? Why? It's no reason, bro. Just a random dude from Nigeria sharing my ideas. Why? What's so bad about the streams, bro? I don't know. It's not like anyone's ever gonna listen to what I'm saying, anyways, because people are gonna listen to what's convenient, and the ideas these people are spewing in this Bitcoin maxi party are convenient ideas. So of course, there's no chance I can reasonably affect whatever you guys are doing in any meaningful way. It's just always going to be me and my little gang of Litecoiners, right, doing our thing to at least tries to get the logical faction of the party, which of course is still not the majority of people. So why are you attacking the streams? Kind of strange, but whatever. Well, I'm gonna continue. This is gonna continue it anyways. So, yep. Let's go ahead. Continue.
One solution was Hashcash, which we just looked at last time I was up here talking. That turned out not to work. Instead of charging people some number of computations to send email, which was the sort of Hashcash solution, we decided, let's just let Google read all our emails, and then they'll tell us which ones are spam or not. That's what the market literally chose. That seemed to work better. Now, why is that? Like, why couldn't email solve that problem in a decentralized way? Why did Nutella ultimately never succeed as the method by which we share files today, 20 years later? Like, why is Tor basically captured by the government? And why did Bitcoin succeed? Uniquely out of all these projects, why did it escape that bottom right-hand corner and become both decentralized as well as very high scale? The answer is not blockchain. We know this, right? It's not the blockchain. The answer is economic incentives. Bitcoin, uniquely on that slide that we were just seeing, is money, right? And that means we can pay people in Bitcoin to do things for us. We can create strong economic incentives to keep the network operating by paying people in Bitcoin. When we're thinking about the context of a file sharing program like Nutella, or a internet sort of dark web program like Tor.
But why do they have to be the comparison? Why must we compare Bitcoin to Tor and to email and to these other things while trying to highlight the importance of economic incentives? Why is that? Why are those the comparisons? Why is that the benchmark? Why not compare? Because I mean, trying to make a case that Bitcoin is special, which it is the most important innovation in finance in the history of money. Yes, but when you're trying to make it special and you're trying to make a case that Bitcoin is essentially the only form of money that should be considered for anything, and you're trying to make a case that economic incentives are what makes it special in a way, why should your comparison be email and these other things? I mean, technically you can, but like, isn't a better comparison supposed to be in this regard supposed to be versus other competitors like, Litecoin, Monero, or even Solana, Ethereum, because they in fact do have their own economic incentives that they use to facilitate network participation and network security. They do have it. So those are supposed to be your comparisons, not email, not the other ones. It's such a strange comparison to make. It really is. It's just one that, in my opinion, serves no other function than to try to create a deceptive perception that Bitcoin is special because of this point, without really showing that in any meaningful way in the regards that actually matter, right? In the situations that actually matter. But let's go ahead and continue.
There's a lot of risk and a lot of obligation without any income, so people tend to not do it. And adversarial behavior is very hard to control, and spam is very hard to control because we can't charge people anything, right? Again, if we tried to bring money into email or file sharing or private networks, we would immediately run into centralization concerns. How are we going to charge people, right? Because Bitcoin is itself a kind of money, it was able to solve this problem. And you might argue that in some sense, the very first system to become really high scale and decentralized has to be a kind of money. Nothing else could ever get there because nothing else is going to be able to solve that problem of how will I pay people in order to operate the network and thereby avoid adversarial behavior and scale cooperation, right? It's done through economic incentives. As this little devil character says, when playing by the rules is more profitable than acting adversarially, we are scaling cooperative behavior. So what this really tells us, right, is that decentralization, again, it comes from economic incentives, and markets are the structures we use to encode economic perspectives at scale to create cooperation. And in some sense, this shouldn't be surprising, right? We're Americans. We know that markets are incredibly powerful. We won the Cold War, right, based on the power of markets, their ability to coordinate human beings at scale and optimize resource allocation and service discovery, right? A blockchain is a passive data structure. How could the blockchain cause all these fantastical outcomes that we traditionally associate with giant, efficient, robust markets? The answer is it cannot. I think if you are someone that believes the blockchain is the solution to your problem, mirroring Parker's last slide, you're kind of wrong. I think you're in a cult. I think you're in a blockchain cargo cult. That you have made the following false syllogism. Bitcoin is decentralized. Bitcoin has a blockchain. Therefore, blockchains cause decentralization. And I think that is false. And I want to continue to convince you of that in the next few slides here. Indeed.
But why that is such a misrepresentation of what all people, everyone that support these different coins. It's such a red herring. That's such a blatant misrepresentation of what they are actually about. I mean, even these other coins that I fundamentally disagree with, like Solana and Ethereum and whatnot, I wouldn't try to reduce them into cults that believe the blockchain is necessary and that's just all about it. I mean, yes, I understand that, like, these other chains like Solana and the other ones that are trying to be, we're going to do RWAs and whatnot, they are kind of like focusing on expanding what the blockchain can do, but like that's not the only thing. They're also focusing on the other aspects as well. You're supposed to address these things in and of themselves and not just try to lump them up, but whatever, which is going to continue.
Bitcoin is literally made of markets. The functions that we need from a currency, namely releasing tokens into circulation so they can be used as money and settling transactions amongst users, those functions which a currency must provide are provided through markets which incentivize their providers by offering them Bitcoin in exchange for their services. We've already talked about this market to some degree in the first set of slides. This is the market to release Bitcoin into circulation. In this market, miners are offering computation in return for Bitcoin. And this is really how this market works. And this is the best possible way to think about it. A market you may be more familiar with is the market that you've used if you've ever yourself sent a Bitcoin transaction. Right? This is the market for settling Bitcoin transactions amongst users once Bitcoins are already in circulation. And this market trades block space, again, for Bitcoins. A theme that will recur throughout this presentation is we're always trading for Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the world's best money and is 1/2 of every value transfer, and therefore will always cause the incentives that we're seeking to promote. Right? In this market, when you set your transaction fee, you are making a bid against other users to be included in the upcoming block that the miner is creating so that your transaction can be settled. This is very much a market process. And this is how I think Bitcoin operates. Bitcoin has created layers of markets which are coupled to each other, in which service providers are paid in Bitcoin so that we can scale cooperative behavior and not have adversarial behavior. If you are a miner, it really is more profitable to you to just play by the rules and don't try to grief the system or subvert it in any way. We could get even further. We could talk about the details of order books and order matching and trade settlement and price discovery. And I think these ideas are totally fascinating, but I don't have time for it. So we'll move on to the next idea, which is what we ultimately value about Bitcoin, just to repeat it, comes from markets, right? The notions of growth, availability, the uncensorability, the ability to defend, and the fixed supply. All of these ideas come from this notion of a very, very powerful market in which people are always going to show up because they want to make money. In fact, they want to make the best money in the world. They want to make Bitcoin. Returning back to this little diagram, I want to give you a couple more examples that help illustrate how important the monetary value of Bitcoin and the size of the market are, and how unimportant the blockchain is in creating those same outcomes. Let me take a brief, quick survey poll. How many people in the audience have heard of the Bitcoin testnet? That's actually about half of us for folks that aren't able to see what I'm seeing. How many have heard of things like Signet or RegTest? Okay, slightly less, maybe about 20% or so. Mostly just Unchained employees raising their hand at this point in the audience. Okay, wonderful. I want to just talk about this very briefly. I think this is a very cool idea. It's something that really helped convince me early in my own thinking about Bitcoin as to why the monetary properties were so useful, why it was indeed Bitcoin, not blockchain, and not the other way around. So as a developer, when I interact with Bitcoin, guess what I don't want to have happen? I don't want to make a mistake in my code and wind up destroying a bunch of Bitcoin in the process, right? That's a very bad outcome. And developers, even good ones, will make mistakes. We will cause bugs, and Bitcoin might get destroyed. So what did we decide to do as developers who want to work on Bitcoin? We made a fake version of Bitcoin. We cloned Bitcoin. It's the exact same thing. It has a blockchain. It has proof of work. It has private keys. It is the same in every single way except for two. It has a different Genesis block, so we can distinguish it. And its coins are not worth anything. There is a wonderful quote here on this page from an early testnet faucet, which we used to use, that I think really captured the paradoxical idea of a money that was created to have no value, right? It's a very weird idea. But something that you should know if you're not a developer is that the Bitcoin testnet does not work. Why is that? Well, routinely, our experience of developers who use the testnet is we'll try to use it. We're expecting blocks to come so we can test our code. Nothing happens for 7 hours. Why? Well, because no one's getting paid to sell computations to the testnet network because the coins aren't worth anything. The market has collapsed, and therefore the service is no longer available. It has a blockchain. Why isn't the blockchain stepping up and fixing the problem? Because it cannot. It is a passive data structure that without an active market operating behind it is useless and performs nothing. How do we actually fix this problem, by the way, as developers, right? When testnet doesn't work for us because it's unreliable, because no one's getting paid to run it. We centralized, right? Testnet is something that's available globally, just like Bitcoin. Instead, we decided to create little private copies of Bitcoin, corporate blockchains that we control. In our engineering team, for example, at Unchained, we operate many of these private blockchain corporate thingies. I don't think much of the world even understands that these things exist, but we find them very useful because now we can immediately control what we want to do. We can test our code with granularity and predictability and reproducibility. But what did we have to do? We took away the monetary properties of Bitcoin. It started failing. It stopped delivering on its value. And then we centralized it to get back control so that it would do what we wanted it to do, right? That is what happens if you take away the monetary properties of the token and the size and scale and the motivation to interact with it in a real open market. Does that make sense? What if you are still bullheaded and you insist that, no, I don't care. I still want to use the blockchain. I love the blockchain. I want to put everything into the blockchain, as Parker was mentioning before. Real estate records, car title, whatever else. Like, I think you're wrong, but you should also ask yourself a question. Is it really true that I can take this structure that is working right now and has been historically at releasing coins into circulation and settling transactions? Can I really bloat it with all those other concerns? And if I do, what will be the back reaction on the quality of the underlying markets which power the blockchain, of which the blockchain is really just a ledger of receipts of trades in those markets? What will happen to those markets if I insist on making this mechanism incredibly more, if I put a huge amount of demands on it? What will happen? Will the market remain decentralized or will it become centralized? Well, it will become centralized. Let's look at some real examples here. I'm not going to go through this table in absolute detail, but the largest points I want to make, these are the projects that are most famous for inventing, creating, synthesizing, promoting the blockchain cargo cult, right? They claim that they can do so much more than Bitcoin can because of the greater capabilities of their blockchain. And by the way, at this point in my life, when I hear statements like that, I hear, we're the best store because our receipts are the best. Does that make sense to you? It doesn't make sense to me.
No, that doesn't make any sense. That's like, you didn't have to do that. Again, he just made a very great point. Like a very great point about like the fact that, yeah, the more things you can do with the blockchain, the more capabilities, the more data sets you're processing. I mean, if the blockchain is processing videos and handling this host of data, it makes it more centralized, which is a very great argument, because of course nodes become very costly to run and the average individual can't participate in networks, so of course it's not decentralized, right? But still, like, why did you have to put that analogy of it being comparable to, oh, because I have my source better because we've got better receipts? That doesn't make any sense, really. It's not even funny. Like, what's the whole point of that? That was so bad.
That's what I hear when people say that, right? So like, let's look at these numbers though, right? Like, when was Bitcoin's last outage? It's only had 2 in its history, and it was in 2013 when the network was so tiny that most people had never heard of it.
Well, guess what? Litecoin's never had an outage. Who would have thought? Pretty cool, right?
An outage since that time ever. That's important. You do not want the world's global reserve currency to experience outages the way that Solana regularly does. What about monetary interventions? Right? Ethereum has had a whole sequence of monetary interventions that has tried to transition from proof of work to proof of stake, which, by the way, I'm not even including in my comparison here. I think that's also a centralizing element, but I'm ignoring that aspect. I'm just trying to show you outcomes. We can talk a little bit about validators. It looks like Ethereum has a whole bunch of validators, but that million validator set, those are not people. Those are processes running on one of 12,000 nodes, far fewer than Bitcoin has full nodes, certainly far fewer than Bitcoin has individual miners trying to mine Bitcoin and earn it. So the picture that I see is, I see a community, a set of communities, an entire side of the market that thinks it is working on protocols and blockchains and technology, and they're on the red path. They're going to centralize as they scale up, and it's going to appear impressive, but the second it butts up against, let's say, legal strictures or central regulation, it is going to crumple, right? If you think you're instead working on markets and money and economic incentives, if you're not writing smart contracts to program computers, you're instead creating incentives to program human beings, then you are on the orange arrow, and you are headed up and to the right, and you are going to scale, and you are going to make it decentralized. And as one final blow to this kind of thinking, I would say that even if you completely didn't listen to me, you did all these things, you built your centralized blockchain, you completely ignored all the things I'm saying, this is where you've gotten to. You have said, hey, it turns out we still need off-chain scaling anyway. We're going to have to build layer 2s and roll-ups and sharding and all sorts of mechanisms because our blockchain is fundamentally not scaling, because I can't put the entire market of the whole world in a receipt.
Well, I mean, it's kind of not true, right? Even though, like, I'm trying to, I don't support Ethereum and Solana, but like, when talking about like Ethereum and Solana specifically, because these are the coins he's talking about and the blockchain he's talking about, when he's talking about like blockchains that are essentially trying to, be capable of doing more stuff, right? And then he singles out like Ethereum as like the ultimate direction you have to end up getting to when you follow this path, which everyone knows Ethereum is so unscalable. It has to depend on all this layer 2s and all that. But why do you have to use Ethereum as the example? Why didn't you use Solana? Because Solana can actually handle all of that capacity without really needing L2s. That. So why did you have to use Ethereum? Again, it's like, why do you have to embellish lies in order to make a point? Like, I don't get it. I don't understand. Like, that entire point would have gone well without you trying to use Ethereum as the base and generalize as, oh, all of them face the same bottlenecks, when that's not really the case.
And so what was the point of building that other blockchain in the first place? Why not just build everything on Bitcoin? So I'll hand it over to you.
Honestly, again, like I said, I don't have a problem with these guys from a perspective of like the technical arguments they make, because they in fact do make very nice technical arguments, right? They in fact say things that are smart. They make very logical, you know, considerations, and they make logical arguments here. But the problem is they try to arrive at a Bitcoin only conclusion, and the way they end up doing it is by embellishing lies, con- contorting reality, trying to reshape the facts, and essentially all of these things that just do not make any sense. That I don't know why they have to do it. And if I'm going to go ahead and give my own answer, and this is just my opinion, right? You have to look where the incentive lies, right? It's all about trying to consolidate market share around Bitcoin and secure their absolute dominance over the entire market in a way where Bitcoin just stays and continues to go up, so your numbers can continue to go up and they can continue to make more money whilst every other thing goes to zero. If that's my own perspective, because that's the incentive I see in why they should do this. Because if they were actually trying to bring a conclusion based off of their technical premises, the conclusions they would have ended up, with would have been conclusions that lie in the range of, the cryptocurrencies, the coins whose blockchain are actually like able to function as P2P cash, are secured by proof of work, and are small enough to be easily replicated across people. I mean, they are not just getting bloated in a way that users can't run nodes, are actually the viable options. Because that's where the technical arguments lead to. That is the only resolve the technical arguments they are making lead to. And if that was their resolve, if that was their answer, if that was what they said, then it would have been fine. It would have been perfect. It would have been logically coherent. But they found ways to try to create like a BTC only answer from that. And that's kind of where the problem with these guys lie. With that being said, I believe that's all. That's really all I have to say today. If you enjoyed this episode, I know that the break-in transmission we had kind of kind of like sent all the viewers away, and I kind of get that. But if you enjoyed the stream, of course you have to go ahead and give us a like and subscribe to the Light Hour live stream. And if you're following us on X, you should go ahead and follow the page. The Light Hour live stream is a Litecoin dedicated live stream we host every Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, 5 p.m. EST on the Flipping Finance page and on the Flipping Finance live page on X and on YouTube. And we host it every week, albeit the final week of each month, where I take my time to get away from this markets and just relax. So with that being said, good night, bye bye, take care, and I will see you guys on Tuesday. I will be ending the stream now.